We all have fears, don't we? Right? And all of our fears are not the same, right? Some people may have fear of flying, fear of spiders, fear of the outdoors, fear of failure, fear of doctors, fear of heights, fear of dogs, you name it. For almost anything we can imagine, somewhere, someone is afraid of it. And when people are polled regarding their fears, there are certain fears that almost always rank highest on the list. Can you think of them? Fear of death is one of the ones. How about fear of public speaking? Okay? And we've heard about that before. People are afraid to get up in front of other people. And that one usually even ranks higher than death, if you can believe that. But there is one other fear that's even bigger than both of them. You know what that is? Fear of commitment. Fear of commitment. Now, we tend to joke about that last one, don't we, sometimes? But for some of us, it's a real problem. Some of us have a hard time taking out a mortgage, worrying about owing someone else for so many years. And some of us are afraid to pursue an academic degree beyond high school, worried about what happens if I don't finish, what happens if I decide to change my mind, and then I'll have wasted so much money. And some people might be interested in maybe going into the military, but none of that means signing up for more years than I would like. And of course, I save the best for last. The fear of commitment to relationships, right? Many of us simply get cold feet and push others away once we start to get too close. I guess you could say too often that many of us want to maintain our freedom, and we don't want to get tied down to anything or anyone. We want to do what we want. We want to do when we want it. The truth is that even though we do sometimes fear certain kinds of commitments, there are other commitments in our life that we embrace willingly. Some of us would never think of missing an episode of your favorite television program. Right? Some of us golf on the same day with the same people and would never think of skipping a round of golf, right? Some of us just have to have the latest phone that comes out the second it comes out, even if our current phone works fine. Some of us place our kids' sports ahead of nearly everything else, even Mass itself at times, right? Some of us haven't missed a day of jogging, a day that you work out. And then again, there are those favorite teams and favorite sports that we watch, especially watching all of the games, especially when it comes to the playoffs. There may be certain fears that we have of commitments, but not all of them. So, what about our commitment to God? Where does that fall in the range of things? That seems to be what Jesus is trying to get his listeners to consider in that conversation that he is having with the rich man in the gospel today. And you know the story very well. The man runs up to Jesus, kneels and asks him what he has to do to inherit eternal life. And the man is clearly a good guy. He follows all the commandments he's been taught, and Jesus doesn't dispute that fact for a second. But then Jesus challenges the man, and challenges anyone within earshot, then and now. And that means that Jesus is challenging us today, you and me. As Jesus went, he looked on the man lovingly, and that's an important detail. And then he tells him, you're still lacking one thing. Go and sell what you have, give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. All right. So Jesus just spoke the words to all of you. So what do you think about what Jesus just had to say to you? Maybe you're thinking, Jesus, just when I'm feeling comfortable, there you go again. Just when I'm feeling pretty good about my relationship with you, there you go. I'm just thinking that I'm a pretty reasonably faithful person who tries to go about their day-to-day trials being a good, decent human being. I never deliberately hurt anybody. I don't defraud anybody. I don't mistreat anybody. And just when things seem to be going pretty good between you and me, you have to shake things up a little bit. You got to rattle my conscience. You got to make me wonder if I can even call myself a true disciple. It's like Jesus is asking, are you just dipping your toe into the water while Jesus is asking you to dive right in? We sometimes forget that Jesus' message is not an easy one because how often do we try to tame it? And that much is true. Sometimes we try to water it down. Sometimes we try to see Jesus' message and make it into something that requires little effort. And yet, would our God have chosen to become one of us, walked our journey, ultimately died for us, simply to give us the lesson, I just want you to go out there, just try to be nice, right? I think we know the answer to that. Because Jesus' life was a pretty radical one. Radical in demonstrating a radical amount of compassion, a radical amount of mercy, a radical amount of forgiveness and generosity and gentleness, and of course a radical amount of love. Because nothing about Jesus' life or Jesus was watered down. Because his life was overflowing in everything. Everything we believe God is, and also everything in what God is calling us to be. Are we afraid to be fully committed to Jesus? Are we afraid that it's simply going to cost us too much? The irony is that sometimes we think that following God's will for us is restricting, that it's going to hold us back, that it's going to take away our freedom. Yet in faith we are taught, sometimes struggle to believe that the opposite is true. God's way is the best way. God's way will always bring us a fullness of life in ways that we can't imagine. God's way is pure freedom. It is a life free from anything and everything that makes us less than who God created us to be. Our way, our own selfishness, is actually what leads us into spiritual bondage. It leads us into the chaos of a self-centered life. It leads us into the slavery of sin. God's way, on the other hand, leads us to something beautiful and meaningful, something life-giving, something worth everything we have to give. God looks on all of us lovingly, as he did the man in the gospel today. And God wants more for us. And of course, he wants more from us as well. May our commitment to God be something that we never fear, but rather something that we embrace each and every day. And may no commitment of ours ever take its place.